5-minute Catholic apologetics and living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the catacombs outside of Rome, how I visited them, and I was blessed to have visited them. This was the second time I've been there, and just to talk about what the catacombs were like in ancient Rome. Now, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, secutor in principio et nunc et semper et seculi seculorum. Amen. So the catacombs, I think most Christians and most Catholics have heard the term catacombs. The majority of the catacombs, and there's catacombs in Paris, there's catacombs all over the place. When we're talking about the catacombs, I'm talking about the ones in Rome. The majority of the catacombs that were in Rome are located in the southern part of Rome, ancient Rome, outside of the walls. Because at the time of ancient Rome, when it was still pagan, it was illegal to bury bodies inside the city walls, understandably so. Even back then, they understood that would be more likely to bring disease. So if you wanted to bury somebody, you had to bury them outside. Now, most of the ancient pagans cremated their remains, so it wasn't an issue. But there were some wealthy Romans, for example, that wanted to have mausoleums and so forth. And we talked about it in the episode about visiting the bones of St. Peter, how originally over on the Vatican Hill, that was a necropolis. That was an area where the wealthy Romans would bury some of their people, and then go to that episode, we talk about that. So the catacombs. The catacombs were largely built starting around 150 AD. It was mostly Romans who had converted to Christianity. This is a good 90 years after St. Peter and St. Paul had been martyred in Rome. The same day today, I also went to St. Paul outside of the walls. That church, which is the church where the bones of St. Paul are located. I went there as well. It was one of the 4 major churches in Rome. And so not far from there would be the catacombs of San Sebastian and the catacombs of San Kalisto. Now, excuse me, I went to the catacombs of San Kalisto because it's the larger one. So starting in 150 AD, Roman Christians started to bury their dead out there. And because of the consistency of the rock outside of Rome, it wasn't too hard to build down in Rome. And in fact, it's mostly like a volcanic clay. And so once it's oxidized, it does turn hard. So you could use your hands. In fact, they were talking about this to tour guides, how you could use your hands, but mostly it's, of course, excavation stuff, to build down. And so they would build down and build levels and then wide. So there were 4 levels worth of catacombs in the catacombs of San Calixtus or San Kalisto. And it was named after him because he was the one who owned the land in that area and later became a martyr. And so in the catacombs of San Kalisto, you have some very famous people. You have something like 10 popes from the first 300 years of the church. I should say it's really from about the popes ranging from about 150 to about 350 in that time. And then you also had the remains of Saint Cecilia, the great virgin martyr. Her bones were buried over there as well. And so they were talking about how close to 500,000 people were buried over in the catacombs. And so in the catacombs, if you go in there were different types of, I guess you could say, places or types of tombs that people would be buried in. The majority of the catacombs there were just kind of rectangular openings where they would put the body, they'd just wrap them and throw some agent on it to limit disease, and then they would just martyr it up. And so you'll see the majority in the catacombs are just these little simple openings. And then there were people that actually had bigger openings, like family vaults that you could walk into, and then you would see the little rectagonal things around it. And there were various altars there as well, and there were certain rooms where the popes were buried. So from about 150 to about 350, this was the most active place for the catacombs. And of course this made sense because we know Constantine legalized Christianity, even though he didn't become a Christian until his deathbed, but he legalized it with the Edict of Milan in 313. And so prior to that, you look under Decian and Diocletian, these were 2 big persecutions. We think of probably the biggest ones being Nero in the 60s AD, which took Peter and Paul. And then later Domitian had some persecutions in the 2nd century, but really Decian and Diocletian in the late 200s had very large scale persecutions. And then with Diocletian dying eventually, just a few years later, Constantine came and Battle of Milvian Bridge, we have an episode here on Constantine, and then he legalized it. But in this period, in 200s, you saw the largest activity going on in the catacombs because Christianity, Catholic Christianity, because that was the only Christianity at the time, was being persecuted. And so you couldn't be buried, you had to bury your family and so forth underground. And also you wanted to bury your family members underground, and people wanted to be buried underground because they also wanted to be close to the popes and other holy people like Saint Cecilia that had been martyred down there. And then around 350 AD, the catacombs stopped being used for burial because at this point, since Christianity was legal, now they could get buried up above the ground. And so the catacombs were really no longer in use. And then for about 400 years, there was minimal activity. And then the 900s, what happened was, Rome went through some bad times. You think of the 5th century, think of the sacking of Rome in 410, and later on in that century. And then the 900s and 800s, not a great time. So some Catholics, the Catholic Christians, came to San Kalisto and San Sebastian and actually got the remains of Saint Cecilia and some of the popes that were buried down there and actually put them in churches inside the city walls, because at this time they were worried about looting. There was a lot of looting going on and a lot of robber barons, for lack of a better word, that were going in there and looting the tombs, looking for jewelry, looking for money and gold and other priceless things. And so the bones of Saint Cecilia, like none of the bones of any of the people that were buried in the catacombs you can see when you go there. All their bones have been moved. So it's more about seeing what it was like when you go down there. And like I mentioned, San Kalisto, the big one, has 4 floors, 72 feet down. And they estimate that if you were to stretch out like every tunnel in that area, it would take an entire day to walk. It is just gigantic, exceedingly extensive. And so from 900 AD to really about the 1700s, it was largely forgotten. And in the 1700s, they knew it was always there, but it was just something that wasn't on the priority. And then the 1700s, they started archaeology down there to kind of hone it out, because it had been a good 800 years, and really, if you think back, it was almost 1500 years since the catacombs were active. And so archaeology began in the 1700s and really was ratcheted up in the mid-1800s through Pius IX, and then they went in and excavated the entire thing and etched out all the 4 floors and found all the artifacts and so forth, and so now when you go in there, it's well preserved. They've put in some brick to make sure the thing doesn't fall on itself, but you can see a lot of the ancient art still on the walls. You can see the mosaics. You can see mosaics of Jesus as the Good Shepherd. You can see mosaics of Jonah. You can see mosaics of just quite a lot of things. It's quite lovely to go into. Now, of course, I couldn't take pictures when I was in there because they don't let you take pictures, understandably so, because this is a sacred space. And so you can't take pictures. You can find kind of like stock photos of the catacombs, but you can't take your own photos. And you can do guided tours in English, Spanish, Japanese, whatever you want. It's about 45 minutes. And if you do go to Rome, I really recommend it. It's also on the Appian Way. So if you guys are familiar with the Appian Way was the main road into Rome. And it led down to the coast. So if you think of all the ships would come to Rome. Rome is on the Tiber. It's not on the coast like Naples is. So people had to come in through the main road, the Appian Way. And so of course the Romans had a great network of roads. Now we would consider them not to be the best roads today, but at the time they were pretty impressive roads. And the Appian Way, coming in from the south part of Rome, was the main road, like the most famous road. And they would line the Appian Way, in the 1st century, whatnot, with crucified people. They weren't necessarily Christians, because crucifixion was done for just the non-Roman citizens. That's why St. Paul is beheaded and was not crucified. But they were just lining the Appian Way with crucified people, just to remind people of the power of Rome. So aside from doing the catacombs, I hit all four. Well, I hit St. Peter's the day before, but I hit the 3 major churches. So in Rome, there's the 4 major churches. You have St. Mary Major or Santa Maria Maggiore, where Pope Francis is going to be buried. He wants to be buried there. St. John Lateran is the original, it is the church of the Bishop of Rome. It is considered to be the mother of all churches and has the highest level among the 4 churches in Rome, even more than St. Peter's. And the popes lived there from when Constantine gave, I can't remember what, I think maybe it was Pope, I can't remember, it's one of the ones from the 320s. He donated that, Constantine donated his palace to the Pope and gave him that building, and so that was kind of the first large public church, and he gave him his palace, and St. John Lateran was the palace of the popes for almost 1,000 years, until eventually the popes moved over to St. Peter's. And then St. Paul outside the walls is the 4th major church, and that's of course where St. Paul was beheaded, and they've had some sort of either a monument or early on in the 1st century, and then later, once Christianity was legalized, they had a small church and they've built a bigger church and so forth. And so that's the 4th major church. So if you ever go to Rome, go to the 4 major churches. I'm sure you'll go to St. Peter's, but definitely hit St. Mary Major, St. John Lateran, St. Paul outside the wall, and then definitely check out the Catacombs of St. Kalisto. All right, guys, post in the comments. Let me know if you've ever been to the Catacombs. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.